Well, you weren't abused as a kid. You never spent time in prison, and you haven't had a sex change. For our crowds here, that makes you a hard sell. She said, you're just another middle-aged American trying to write great literature. And so then in England, it turned out that I was an easy sell, and the reason was that kind of the Oprah books of England picked The Highest Tide as their big read for a summer, and the way that they did it, it's called the Richard and Judy Show, and Richard and Judy, this middle-aged couple, interview some celebrity who read the book, and in my case, the celebrity who read the book was Abby Titmuss, who's kind of the Paris Hilton of England. And so they showed footage of her walking down the beach while she was reading my book, and in her bikini, and so then it shot up to the top of the bestseller list. And so then back here, kind of the highlight for me was when it was made into a play in Seattle. They adapted it to the stage, and I didn't have anything to do with it other than to say go ahead. And it ran for 3 weeks at the Seattle Center, and it was well received, and everything was good about it. But what was really fun for me was when I went up for a rehearsal. And I walked in and I met the cast, and there it was. Everybody that was in the book was in the room, and they amazingly looked like the characters. They didn't even basically have to introduce themselves, but still they did. I'm playing Phelps, and it just struck me as like an ideal, a very thoughtful mental hospital where they say, here are the voices in your head. You were right. They do exist. And so meanwhile, I've also been trying to get a screenplay off the ground, and that's been so much more arduous and bizarre than just going and watching the play. With the screenplay, it started out with they hired somebody to. They paid somebody too much to write a really bad script, and I had to explain to them just how bad it was. And after I convinced them how bad it was, I said, and I'd be happy to work on it with you, with this director and the producer. And they said, okay. And and I'm not getting paid for this. But I kind of bluffed that I knew how to write screenplays. And so in the 2 weeks before I had to go down to LA to meet with these guys and brainstorm, I spent, I read like 12 good movies over and over again, and I read 3 books on screenwriting so that I could just get down there and bluff and at least know the language. And as soon as we started working on it, I was informed that I wasn't being a team player, because team playing means that I had to kind of depart from the book and understand this is a movie and we need to put the book aside. And I kept thinking, well, why do you want it then? If you want to ignore what the book has. But then I learned over time that what I needed to do was just make suggestions that sounded like they were coming off the top of my head, that were exactly from the book, but they just didn't remember the passages. So then they started thinking, now he's getting it. And so I just read the latest draft that they've been working on last night, and I was really actually relieved that it in many ways resembles the book. It's just kind of an odd feeling, to some degree. I mean, it's just a book, but it feels like your child that you're giving to these people to take care of, and you don't really trust them. So the Highest Tide basically grew out of my affection for Puget Sound. I grew up in that area, and when I moved away to the East Coast and spent too much time in Spokane, and so when I finally got back to Puget Sound, I was just so dazzled by it. It was kind of like the whole area was suddenly in high def, and I was really I was just compelled to try to write a novel there. And so in that case, I spent a lot of time just kind of waiting for the premise to come to me. I knew I wanted to set a novel on Puget Sound, and I was just waiting for the idea. And in that case, it came in the shape of this weird deep-sea fish that washed up near my house, and that kind of sparked the whole idea, and I rolled from there. And after I wrote that, I knew where the next novel was going to be set, but I didn't really know the storyline. I knew that it was going to be set up on the U.S.-Canadian border, and I fell in love with the idea of setting it up there. When I was a reporter for the Oregonian, I was given the assignment because I was their Washington State reporter, and I kind of had freedom to go write about whatever I wanted to some degree, and they wanted me to explain the border better than they understood it. And so I went up there after 9/11, and in the time period, right after 9/11, there was in the 30-mile stretch at the top of the state of Washington, there was maybe 30 Border Patrol cars traversing back and forth. But in a very short amount of time, there was 90. And so they tripled the force up there, and the whole goal and the whole idea was to catch terrorists, of course. But I was riding around with the Border Patrol guards, and what they were primarily catching was incredible amounts of marijuana. Because the BC bud comes down from BC up there, and it's all hydroponically grown indoors, and it was coming down in volumes that they just had no idea. So all of a sudden their seizures were just skyrocketing. That there's 10 times as much marijuana coming through as was last year, and which just created more hysteria till we got to stop this. And then at the same time, though, they were finding incredible amounts of illegals coming from other countries in through the north, because it was a lot easier than coming up through the south. And so when I'm riding around up there and talking to these Border Patrol guards who keep holding up these... That's a weirdo. That's all right. Keep going. All right.
We know where we are.
Okay. I'm not that paranoid. I'm not going to worry about it. And so I'm hanging around with these Border Patrol guards who keep showing me these buds like excited teenagers. They're showing me the marijuana, and I just started thinking that this is a bizarre battlefront on not only the war on drugs but the war on terror. And so I thought that if I set something up there, that it could be provocative and at the same time comic, because our wars on these things have a real comic edge to at least most of us. And so I started trying to understand the terrain up there and hoping that the story would rise up out of it. And so it's mostly dairy farms out there. So I spent some time on dairy farms, and you just have these quiet, gorgeous valleys of dairy farms in Mount Baker and then the San Juan Islands. And then I also went into Canada and I hung out with kind of their marijuana culture up there, and that's where people inform me with things like, you Americans are euphoria-phobic, man. But but what I enjoyed, though, is just the whole contrast from the way they looked at the world to the way, just on the other side of the line, how really uptight and scared we were by comparison.